Kevin, you want to teach us?
Yeah, just there we go. So it's just short ideas from Parashat Truma, which is this week's parasha, and people contributed to the Mishkan materials, money, the materials, gemstones, jewelry, etc. And the one of the exercises was to create unity in purpose for the Jewish people, that they all contributing to something that would be which would a great spiritual uh, purpose. The Mishkan, which people, the way the Kohen would do his avodah, and they would contribute to something really good altogether, not only a select few like you get in certain countries where the elites take all the glory for themselves and they exclude others instead of being inclusive. So this, Lahavdil, we're not like that. And this was one of the main reasons to achieve the creating a spiritual entity, the Mishkan, where the Kohen Gadol could represent them and do the sacrifices, etc.
Good. Makes sense. Um, yeah, I appreciate that. All right, guys, just we can't keep going on and on what we covered. So just in principle, off when the Gemara does actually use its typical example of first set of witnesses and second set of witnesses, at the end of the day, the Gemara also uses the term the second set of witnesses say to the first, we were with you in another location at the time where you saw the crime. But it can extend further. The reason why it uses the term witnesses is, so that's the phraseology used in the Gemara. It's possible that the first set are not aware that the second set saw them there. However, it then becomes a little bit more complicated because um, generally, when you know you've had lunch with two people and they witnessed you in another location, it's a lot more difficult to backtrack. If somebody said, well, we saw you and a friend there, you could say, prove it. So then it's a little bit more in depth. The principle of it is that the reason they punished is they weren't there to witness the crime. So even if this person is a habitual criminal, the fact that they used the justice system to try and get this person convicted means they deserve the reciprocal penalty. The only reason that they don't get a reciprocal penalty in the case where the defendant has been already convicted in another court is they're testifying against somebody that's halakhically dead. Is that pretty clear to all of you? It's not that complicated. We're going to go through cases now of when it extends to monetary cases or corporal punishment being lashes. But one of the points that Rava brought forward, as you know, is he said, well, listen, it's a little bit more complicated than that for the simple reason that you could have a case of uh, vantage points. So what do we mean? We mean that when the Gemara initially talks about it in Devarim chapter 19, verse 16, because 19 verse 19 is you shall not yeah, obviously, they shall do to you as you intended to do to your brother. But it starts off verses before discussing this concept of, as it says in the Chumash, to testify against the victim, something removed from reality. What does it mean, something removed from reality? Is that the witnesses are removed from the scene of the crime by the testimony of the second set. That's where we get it from. And we learned that in the school of Rav Yishmael. We did this about a week and a half ago. And Rava brought this point and said, look, in the east wing of the palace, that person killed somebody. And two other witnesses came and said, but you were with us in the west wing of the palace at the time of the alleged crime. So Arthur, it does use the term in the classical sense of the Gemara of saying the second set were with the first set. That is the classical example. You can't let it confuse you and say, well, what's the second set? The second set are testifying against the first set. Since they were with them, they can witness as to their whereabouts somewhere else. The first set or witnessing the whereabouts they claim to have seen the defendant being in. Do you see this difference? Okay, so it's pretty. So Arthur's pretty smart. Like sometimes when there's a lot going on, we all get a little bit tired and distracted. So the problem is that as we saw with the Ritva and Tosfot, is that in many cases we try and see if their cross testimony can happen before they actually even um, are sworn in as witnesses. In other words, we do some precursory cross testimony of each witness separately. If they manage to get into the particular court case, at that point they've got skin in the game. They could lose their lives if they're in a capital case against 23 judges, not for wasting the judge's time, but because they simply wanted to use the justice system to put an innocent person of the crime they accuse him of to death. Okay, so the Gemara is saying probably what would happen in all probability is before it even came to trial. You don't want to waste 23 judges of the Sanhedrin's time. Their job is to get the defendant off. They're going to do everything possible. But and they actually don't want to kill the Adam Zomim either. If they don't want to kill one person, and this is a person that could be guilty of death. Just picture this. This person is probably guilty of death, of committing murder. So if they don't want to convict him, they certainly don't want to convict two people. There's testimony just did it. It's one thing that if they want to get somebody off that actually murdered. But even more so if two people testified it was pure testimony, even more so they want to get the two of them off. What ends up happening if it's the murderer doesn't respond to the warning against him that it's prevented by the Torah and it's going to have a certain penalty. If he doesn't acknowledge the Hazroah, he might get off by the Sanhedrin, but it doesn't mean we're not going to feed him bread and water and then put barley, and he might end up dying indirectly, because if he tied somebody to a pier and waited for the tide to come in, that's also indirect, so it would work itself out either way. Bottom line is, one of the things that Rava mentions is it reasonable to see from that distance? Probably they'll ask the witnesses there before they came to court. But if it does get to court, then at that point they got skin in the game if most people can't see at that distance. Because what they should have done is say, we were in the West Wing at the time, we saw the murder in the East Wing, we could see it. If you want to ask us any questions, with pleasure. Before the defendant is convicted of murder, they'll say, come on, let's see what the most people can see. And then the Eidim Zomimim are not going to get the reciprocal death penalty because no verdict has been reached against the defendant. The case is thrown out of court. So full disclosure eliminates death penalty for the Eidim Zomimim, which is quite prudent to bear in mind. The other thing was, as Lance and Gavin mentioned, distance. Can you, if you were with a second set of witnesses elsewhere, could you have reached from province A to province B in that amount of time with your particular breed of animal and that age of that animal? If it was average and you could, you're not convicted as Eidim Zomimim. If you needed a supersonic missile, you were convicted of Eidim Zomimim because it's not possible. Guys, are you seeing where we're going so far? It's not that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. Right, let's move on. The next step gets a little bit more complicated, because what new point is Rava informing us of? He is obviously informing us, but of the fact of the East Wing and the West Wing sort of setup. So we're going to be going through, in the fifth daf, we're going to go through it in the sixth daf. So in other words, if there are four witnesses, now according to the sixth daf, it doesn't mean the two witnesses have to see the other two. At least one of the parties has to see one of the parties. In other words, the first opinion is that one of the Eidim Zomimim from the four has to see another one within that set of four. And in that particular case, they judged as one solid unit of four, which helps the Eidim, because if somebody amongst them is accused of being a conspirator, unless they're all convicted of being Eidim Zomimim, where they can be placed in a different location, the conspiring witness or witnesses do not get put to death, because all of them have to be convicted as Adam Zommerman in order for them to get the reciprocal death penalty in a capital case. Okay, so if the two sets, for example, were in the East Wing and the two sets were in the West Wing and neither saw each other, but they viewed what was in front of them, how can you imagine? Can you see there's a pillar here? So on this side, they're almost in a balcony setup. Look at Gavin's thing at the kotel. You can see their windows. Can you see Gas and Gavin's thing by the dome of the croc of nonsense, actually. But anyway, the dome of the rock, you can see there's a window and there's another window, and they're viewing a kram in the kotel. Now, neither one in one of those windows can see the other one because the wall is preventing their viewing of each other, but they can see what's ahead of them. Yes? No? Yes?
Yes.
So in that case, the two sets of witnesses don't get to see the other two. There's two different restaurants. In that case, they tried as separate witnesses. Now, if another pair come along and say that two of the witnesses were with them in a different location, then and the verdict was against the defendant, then those Adam Zimmerman get the death penalty. So how do we still convict the defendant? Because the other two legitimately might have seen it, or certainly they don't have a secondary set of witnesses saying that they were in a different location. Therefore, the defendant is put to death on the testimony of one of the sets of two witnesses, and the other two witnesses were caught somewhere else on the day they purported to have been in the West Wing by the second set who said they were in Tel Aviv with them at a different restaurant. And therefore, that's a case where two of the Adam Zommermem are put to death because they're not judged with the four, because the two witnesses cannot see the other two witnesses. If they all are together, but so you say if they're all together, then how can they be Adam Zommerman? Very, very simple. Is one of the witnesses said, yeah, I saw the other witnesses. I know who they were. Like we got a shul together, but none of them saw him or his fellow. That's clearly a case where there's another set of witnesses that said, you were with us in Tel Aviv. They might have claimed they saw the other two witnesses, but it certainly wasn't corroborated by the second set who said they were with them at lunch in Tel Aviv somewhere else, nor by the first set who said, well, we didn't see those other witnesses in the West Wing. We were eating in the East, we were eating in the West Wing as well, but we didn't see them. So it's very, very clear, guys. It's not very complicated. So we're dealing with a capital case, and then Rava just makes this point. Then we also have this whole complicated thing that is actually very simple, and I did the work for you. I said, don't worry about when the case happens. This is a Tuesday, it's a Wednesday. He's convicted on the Thursday, the previous Sunday. It's going to drive you guys mad. I did the work. You don't have to do the work. What we are saying is today is Monday, the 24th of February. If on Thursday, the 27th of February, two witnesses came and said that yesterday, on Sunday the 23rd, this person committed a murder in Santon City. And in fact, that person didn't commit a murder at Santon City on the Sunday, but committed it on Monday, the 24th. We are saying the Adam Zommermem are, in that particular case, going to get the death penalty. Why? Because the person didn't commit the Monday and the Sunday. The murder on the Sunday, committed it on the Monday. So is he a criminal? Yes. Even the second set of witnesses said, listen, this guy's a habitual mafia psychopath. We feel sorry for you that you're getting the death penalty, but you weren't there. You were with us on Sunday. You were with us somewhere else. So we get where you're coming from, but that's the reality. So the first thought that you have in your mind is, well, maybe because they admitted to seeing the crime on a Sunday, but it occurred on a Monday, that's why they get the reciprocal death penalty. So then the Gemara says, well, what happens if it happened on the previous Friday, right? If instead of you saying it happened on the 23rd, it happened on the 21st. So then you could say, but he was already a murderer at the time, and then you saying on a Sunday, so why did the Adam Zommerman get punished? Because the murder occurred before you say it occurred. So the Gemara says, no, they still get the reciprocal death penalty. So it turns out that there's only two metrics to judge this. Number one, when did the Zomamim testify? They testified this coming Thursday to be, okay, on the 27th of February, okay? And the only reason that they could ever get off is for some reason, if prior to their testimony this coming Thursday, this person was convicted of a homicide. He could have killed somebody tomorrow and then be convicted on the Wednesday, and the people testify on the Thursday, but they said on Thursday it happened on the Sunday. Gemara said it doesn't matter whenever it happened. The only thing of it is they don't get the reciprocal death penalty if this person has already been convicted in another court and they bring this case in a different court, because what are they doing testifying against somebody that's halachically dead? So it's taking all of these factors out of the equation. Can you see, guys? I'm trying to simplify it for you as simple as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you can read it, but I guarantee you if you read it, probably you would have been very confused. The Sunday, the Monday, the previous Friday. I'm just simplifying everything for you. Doesn't mean you should never do Chazorah or prep, God willing, but the sea hasn't split yet and Mashiach hasn't come yet. So it is what it is. So let me just go to the issue of where we're dealing with at the moment. So what we are dealing with is the Gemara says, okay. So I'm just going to read it in the Gemara, two things quickly from the ruling of Rava, based on the capital case, as well as this chiddush of having four witnesses that if they're not together, they're separated into two groups of two. Two witnesses can be Adam Zomamim. The defendant can still get the death penalty because the other two were not testified to be in a different location. Very simple. Okay, that's another novel point. And now we're going to deal with a monetary case within the same principles of Rava. So Rava said yet in another case, on Sunday that person killed somebody, and two others came and said, you were with us on Sunday at another location and could not have seen the killing. However, on Monday that person killed someone. Thus the second set of witnesses agrees that the accused deserves to be executed. And moreover, even if they said on the previous Friday that person killed somebody, in other words, it was indeed happened before the Adam Zomamim claimed that they saw it on a Sunday. In other words, you could say maybe afterwards we understand why there's a problem. But this was even before, so everybody agrees that this defendant is actually a killer. So the person indeed deserved the death penalty. At the time, the first witnesses testified falsely against him. Okay? The first witnesses are nevertheless executed, as Rava says, as Adam Zomamim, at the time they testified falsely, because the person they accused was not subject to the execution based on their false testimony, because they were not at that location. And although he was indeed a murderer, he had not yet been convicted and sentenced in court. His subsequent conviction and sentence to death does not exempt them from the death sentence they deserve for testifying falsely against him. So we see here that one of those principles is that there was no conviction, even though this person was a stone killer. He hadn't been convicted. The minute the court convicts this defendant, dead man walking, you can testify against him all you like. As Adam Zomamim, you're not going to get the reciprocal death penalty. How do we know this? Because we learned in Sanhedrin, Gavin and I learned, you have what you call a mazid and you have a treifa. This is somebody, treifa's got one of the ailments that's terminal within 12 months. And if you kill a treifa, you don't get the death penalty because the person is known as halachically terminal. Okay? There is one opinion that says if you prematurely hasten his death, you're liable to the death penalty, but that's one opinion. The Tanna Kama generally say it's a reason that the Sanhedrin gets this murderer off if that person was terminal. What they'll do with him in Shemaim is another issue. In terms of the barley treatment, I'm not sure regarding that, but certainly Sanhedrin don't convict him. Now, you have a mazid or somebody like that. I, I don't think it, no, I don't think it's a mazid. It's another term with the mim. I think I must just double check, which means that the base din sentenced him to death already convicted him, and the it happened that he was in a bar fight, because people like this generally don't wake up one morning and go from being a tzaddik to a rosha. Takes decades to hone that sort of skill and psychopathy. Decades. So, news flash, he goes into a bar and it gets in a fight, but with the wrong oak, and the oak kills him. Well, this guy doesn't die at the hands of the Sanhedrin, because this other person was convicted. He happened to escape sentencing, not sentencing, the actual sentence imposed upon him from the verdict, but it's a way to exonerate in Sanhedrin the person that murdered, on the grounds that the defendant was halachically dead, either from a terminal illness or by being put to death by the Beis Din. So the Gemara says, well, why does obviously Rava have to teach this law below? Because why are we saying that? Because you remember Sanhedrin came before Makkos. There is an opinion that Chelek, which was the chapter on who's going to inherit Olam Haba, doesn't appear in the previous versions of the Gemara. In fact, if you look at the Mishnayos, it talks about, goes directly into Adam Zomamim and then goes into Makkos. So we already learned that this person was off the hook. So the Gemara is saying, well, what is Rava added here? And it says, this is the new point that Rava is informing us of. We are going to be learning in a Mishnah in 6b, which states as follows. Therefore, since they are considered, now you've got a case where it would be nice, the Gemara doesn't, Schottenstein doesn't exactly introduce it, but it's this case of 4 people testifying against the defendant. The Gemara doesn't say this. You've got to kind of work it out. It's a lot of fun. Therefore, since they are considered 2 separate sets of witnesses, if one of the sets is found to be Zomamim, and the Zomamim are executed, and the second set is exempt from any punishment. Thus, we see from the Mishnah that even when the accused is found guilty and is executed for the murder, the Zomamim are also executed for testifying about the crime that they had not seen. So why does Rava add this? This is an important point. The Gemara responds that the first part of Rava's ruling is implied by the Mishnah, but the novelty is in the second part of the ruling, meaning the latter part of Rava's ruling, which states, which is not the case if sentence has been passed, necessitates his ruling, meaning the Gemara now gives the remainder of Rava's ruling. If 2 witnesses come and said, on Sunday that person was sentenced to death, and on Sunday that person was sentenced to death, and 2 others came and said, on Sunday you were with us at another location, but you could not have witnessed the sentencing. However, on the previous Friday, that person was sentenced to death. He's already been sentenced to death before the time the first witnesses claimed to have seen the sentencing, and certainly before their testimony. So it has to do with, as long as this person is dead man walking before their testimony. And moreover, the Gemara brings the point. It said, even if you say on Monday the person was sentenced, but the sentencing took place after the Zomamim claimed that it did. They said, listen, it claimed this person killed on the Friday, they were sentenced on the Sunday, but it turned out that they were actually only sentenced on the Monday. The reason the Gemara says the Eidim Zomamim are not executed is for at the time they testified, the person was already subject to execution. And it's as if they testified falsely against a halachic dead person. And that facet of law was not stated by the Mishnah, and that's the novel point by Rava. So Rava's teaching 2 novel points. The one novel point is if you have 4 witnesses, but they can't see each other, they're tried as 2 groups of 2. And it could happen that if 2 later found to be Zomamim by second set, they put to death, even if the defendant's put to death. So you say, why put them to death? Because this person is not innocent, the defendant. He's guilty of murder. Yeah, but the thing of it is, he wasn't sentenced yet. He was sentenced to death, but he wasn't, sorry, he committed a murder, but he wasn't yet sentenced to the death penalty. And why is he sentenced in the first place? Because the one set of witnesses do not have a secondary set saying that they were in a different location at the time. So it could happen that one set is corrupt, one is legit, and they get the death penalty if there's no conviction, even though a crime is being committed prior to testimony. So it's not about whether a person deserves it, it's whether you're testifying against a dead man walking or not. All right. We've got this case coming up to extend the matter to fines. How long have we got, guys? Lance has a question. I assume he doesn't have carpal tunnel syndrome and he's asking a question. Does
But
he?
10
And he's
minutes
not
left.
on mute.
He's on mute. Lance?
Yeah.
Lance?
Sorry, something you touched on was somebody that's terminally ill. Okay, you're saying that you can't get off the hook. Now,
I didn't
I've
say
got a
that.
problem with that.
I didn't say that.
You said that if someone's terminally ill, and then Zommerman testify against somebody who was terminally ill, they wouldn't get a death sentence because the person was, I suppose you can say, dead man walking.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so why do Zommerman get punished? Because they're trying to make a monkey business of the court system. Okay, they are trying to undermine the court system. So they get put to death. Now, someone that's terminally ill. Okay, you hear plenty times about people who've been told they're terminally ill. They've got cancer. They've got 3 months to live, and 6 years later they're still alive. So we can't determine who's terminally ill and who's not. So that's the first point. And the second point is whether they were terminally ill or not. That person those witnesses should still be liable just for the fact that they're trying to undermine the court.
Okay, can I answer your 2 questions? As I think Lance brought up some good points. There's even a third point in Lance's thing. Is if they shorten somebody's life, this is actually the strongest point that was brought up in Sanhedrin, is that, listen, say the guy has got 12 months, Lance, for argument's sake. No one wants their time cut short. They'd bond their house to have 12 months more with their family. 12 months more. So even let's just say, let's make your question stronger. It's that good a question. Let's just say that it is one of those terminal illnesses. How do we know? Because the Gemara states, I think there are 18 specific ones, and it states what they are and how do you know? Ronnie Hockman will tell you. So it's not what the doctor prescribes. It's certain facets. Just like with kashrut, there's certain things that would make an animal a treifa or nevela, where you can't consume of that animal when it figures out a puncture, a aorta, etc., etc. These are things that can be determined, but there were only a certain small segment. So Lance, you're right. In certain cases, in many, many diseases, what a doctor's guesstimate was, not even an accurate diagnosis, was not sufficient to get a direct murderer off. The one point that the Gemara is saying is, if we learn in Sanhedrin that if A kills B with a knife, and B was a treifa that had 12 months to live, or he was sentenced by the court, I think as a mazid, where he was going to die at the death sentence either way. The stronger question is a treifa because he's actually got 12 months. This person is shortening his life and deserves to die, technically, or at least not die, but suffer a hell of a lot for that. And there is one opinion when a person is attacked with 10 clubs, and one of their opinions, I think it's Rav Yehuda or Rav Yochanan, who said that the 10th man that actually takes the final blow, this guy's going to die, but he, does the final hammer blow, so to speak, he's liable because he hastened it. The other opinion saying they all contributed to it. So you've asked 4 separate questions. The first one, just to make it stronger, is if you circumvent or cut somebody's life short, a person will be held fully responsible in Shemaim, but the Beis Din's job or the Sanhedrin's job is to get somebody off. And if you can get somebody off the death penalty because they haven't acknowledged a warning given to them by the witnesses that what they're about to do is prohibited, it's a capital offense and it has the death penalty and the right death penalty, some say a general death penalty. I sent you the source of that already. If the person doesn't acknowledge it, they don't get the death sentence. So, Lance, that question is also strong because they're actually committing a murder, but they're not even acknowledging a warning. Or unless you can read somebody's mind, person A goes to B and stabs him, so he's off. So we learn that the Bavli treatment takes care of that, but the Sanhedrin can't do it directly. Number two, it's if that's a case of a direct murder, here something that involves no action that gets somebody sentences to death, while they get the reciprocal punishment, it's not nearly as bad as being the first cause in a person's murder. That you've got to know, that always direct is seen far more stringently. And the court doesn't give, by the way, a court doesn't give the death penalty for wasting the court's time. This is the point that Gavin also made there, the error. They get the reciprocal death penalty because they're corrupting the justice system and using it to get somebody killed, and their testimony is going to get somebody killed. But if this person is halachically dead by either terminal illness of one of the 18, I don't think it's 11, I think it's 18, stated, then they technically don't get the reciprocal death penalty because this person, the halachic definition is within 12 months they're going to die. Whether they're sentenced by the based in with the death penalty immediately or within a terminal illness, you can't be testified at. Let me tell you why. What is the point of Adim Zimmerman? What you intended to do to the victim is done to you. You intended to have this person killed, but he's dead. So it's not, you're not going to have anything done to him that's not going to happen to him already. That's if you're basing it on intention. If you're basing it on verdict, that was the other opinion. This is the difference between Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama as to whether it's a penalty or a mammon compensation, measure for measure or punitive, because what you sought to do the defendant is not done to him, because when the second set of witnesses testify against the first, the defendant isn't put to death. So we see that the punishment seems more extreme. Then it's not measure for measure, but it's because the verdict is you wanted him sentenced to death, but you can't have somebody sentenced to death that is already considered halachically dead, Lance. And that's the point of the Gemara. That's the point of the Gemara. Will the person be responsible in Shemaim for cutting that person's life short? Well, in the case of Sanhedrin, yes. In case of the Adam Zomim, they actually haven't cut the person's life short because the execution hasn't been carried out yet, because they could only be convicted of a reciprocal penalty if it's the window period between the verdict and the carrying out of the sentence. You get it? Lance? Are you still on mute? Any further question? I'm happy to answer any further question.
Look, I don't know the 18 cases he's talking about. I'd need to know more about that to fully answer, to fully have my question answered. I'd need to have more information about those 18 cases. What are they considered someone that's dead man walking?
Well, look, if say you're right, say it's cancer and the person outlives that. We're not talking about that. These are cases where, just like a trephine and nevel of an animal that would render an animal unkosher, these are things that even before DNA and forensics, etc., this was terminal. That's for sure was terminal. So it's cases in a case before medical sophistication where they could guarantee the person would die within 12 months. They're very specific cases. So I agree with you. Most of the time, they would get the penalty.
What about the fact that these Zomimim are they're still trying to undermine the court system?
No, that's not worthy of the death penalty, because if you think about it, take a person that actually murdered. The court system actually drags out 23 judges to do everything in its power to get off somebody that they saw murdered another person. might have been one witness or two witnesses or whatever. So if the court's prepared to spend all this time to save a life for an actual crime that was committed, in this case, this was verbal testimony, that would have been the same result. Also, the case we're talking about is amazing. It's not a treifa. It's somebody that was already sentenced to death in the court, and that sentence would have been carried out in a day or two. It was immediate. So you're not really wasting the court's time there. The person.
So if you're terminally ill, that's a heter to become a serial killer.
No, it's not, because they do the Bavli treatment. They capture the person and they will not allow them free, and they just find it's the bread, water, barley. It's sorted. He won't live to 12 months. The Sanhedrin doesn't kill him, but he won't live to 12 months. We went through this with Rav Simcha.
But Damon,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I told you barley was bad for you.
But would you